Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to a gloomy day. I'm out here looking at my dormant St. Augustine grass here at the Freedom Factory, getting ready to give it a cut, which I wanted to say real quick for my friends in Florida, don't panic over the frost and the freeze that we got. Even though your lawn might be looking brown, I've got a blog post below for you that should help you. Everything is going to be fine, and that's what I'm out here doing now, is working to recover this by giving it a good mow, because when all else fails, give it a mow. Also, I wanted to let all of you know, I've got 2 new podcasts out, actually. You can link those below. I'm really back on the podcast train, really enjoying that. I know a lot of you have asked me, when are you bringing that back? Or, go ahead and bring it back. So 2 episodes up now. And in fact, that's what this video is. This is a clip from my most recent podcast that is about sustainable sod production over at Bethel Farms. I think it'd be super interesting. Every one of you is going to learn something. I surely know that I did. So I hope you enjoyed this little bit different video. And I hope wherever you are, your lawn season gets started soon. Let's get into it. All right, y'all, so this next segment is going to be really interesting, but also really different than what you're used to. And the reason is because it wasn't even meant to be part of the podcast in the beginning, but it became something that I thought was much better conveyed in this long-form content. So what this is an interview with Nick Green, who is in charge of Bethel Innovations. He's also the farm manager at Bethel Farms in Arcadia, Florida. They're the sod farm. I work with them and have worked with them for a few years. They've been friends for a long time. And I was at the TPIE, the Tropical Plant International Expo, as you guys know, 2-3 weeks ago. I was there as their guest, hanging out with them in their booth. I talked about that in the last podcast. And while I was there, they had this variegated St. Augustine grass, which if you're watching on YouTube, I'll put a picture of it up. When I was there, I was like, this is really interesting, because I posted that picture of the variegated St. Augustine grass, and the reaction that I got, especially on Instagram, was very intriguing, I would say. As well as, and that's from our lawn folks, as well as the reaction, though, at the show from tropical plant people was very interesting, this variegated St. Augustine grass. And I thought, man, I want to go out and get some more content on that, right? Maybe I'll do me a viral TikTok with some variegated St. Augustine grass. Get me on the TikTok over there. That was dumb. So I just went out there this week to go ahead and get a little bit more footage of that. Ended up that footage didn't turn out real well because we just got that freeze. And so I'm going to wait and go back to get some better stuff. But while I was there, I ended up talking to Nick, and he was telling me all about Bethel Innovations and what they're doing there. And this became something completely not what I was expecting, and turned out to be completely awesome and educational. And I really wanted to share it with you guys. So let's get into it now.
So yeah, my background, I'm from Manatee County. I think you live in Parrish, right?
I do, yeah.
I grew up in that same area.
Oh, nice.
So that's where I'm from. I went to UF, studied turf grass science for a bachelor's degree. Got a master's in turf breeding and genetics. After that, I went to Johnston Seed Company in Oklahoma, where I did their Bermuda grass breeding. And then after that, I moved home, built houses for a few years, and then I came on with Bethel Farms about 3 years ago.
Awesome.
So I'm in charge of the production here on this farm and the newly started Bethel Innovations. So that's going to be breeding, production research, new chemicals, some interesting brand new ways to kind of grow the sod crop, what I call sustainable sod. So we got a lot going on.
Okay, so I want to interrupt right here just real quick, because you heard Nick mention the word sustainable sod, and I want to give a little bit of context here. That goes into, when we're going to start talking about here, you'll see what is known as regenerative agriculture. And if you guys remember, I talked last year about a Netflix documentary called Kiss the Ground. It's narrated by Woody Harrelson, and actually John Perry and I did an episode of this podcast where we talked about it. And it mentions a lot of that. And that Netflix documentary got me thinking about a lot of things. It kind of got me to mull on some things, and still does. And so it was very interesting when I was out here at Bethel Innovations, and now Nick is starting to talk about how they are using those concepts with sod production. Now, let me explain something, and you're going to see it takes me a minute to realize what he's saying, because I wasn't expecting this conversation to go where it did. But when we harvest sod here in Florida, we leave what are called ribbons. So they go through and they cut out the sod, and we do everything in squares here, not the rolls like you might see up north. And they're cutting the squares out. Well, when they go to the next row to cut another line of squares or another row of squares, they have a machine that does that. They leave a ribbon. It's a I don't know, 3 inches wide maybe. And the reason they do that is there'll be these ribbons all through the field. Those grow back together to form the next crop, because our crops, our grass here, which is going to be Bermuda, zoysia, St. Augustine grass, and then to an extent Bahia grass. I should say Bahia grass. Didn't want to disappoint those grasses spread by stolons and rhizomes, and they creep across the ground. So you don't need to reseed a field after you harvest the sod. You just let the ribbons remain, and they'll all grow back together within a matter of months. Now, that is something that I need you to picture as he starts to describe this form of sustainable sod production.
Yeah. And then also the green strip over there is part of the sustainable sod program I'm trying to run, kind of a carbon sequestration, soil building, regenerative agriculture, sustainable, as opposed to just a more intensive agriculture. So trying to get the soil biology back up, soil organic matter back up, gain the benefits of cover crops, reduce NP and K inorganic inputs, and just kind of grow a more sustainable, environmentally friendly, cheaper, less production cost system. So that's actually a really cool thing we're working on now.
So the idea is, instead of having to use synthetic NPK 3-4 times a year, whatever you're doing, you're just going to use what's already in the soil and keep building the soil, so you have less inputs.
Correct. Yep. We're looking for about a 50% reduction in the NP and K, the inorganic fertilizer.
But no loss in grow time, because that's part of the idea, right?
Yeah. We two stipulations: can't take any longer to grow it, and it still has to be the Bethel quality. So we can't slack on those two components.
So what are you doing to improve the soil? Are you chopping and dropping something? I mean,
cover crops to start with are going to do a lot of things for the soil. Keeping a living root in the soil,
right,
12 months a year is the key to this kind of program, that regenerative ag. When we harvest and we just have ribbons, we're at 96% fallow.
Right. And just
so there are no living roots. You're prone to all kinds of overheating of the soil, poor water holding characteristics. The fertilizer you do throw down will not get taken up if there's nothing there to take it up. It has only one way to go, and that's down or washing off the top. But that's going to capture a lot of those nutrients, put them back into the soil. We get some soil compaction because we can't work the ground most of the time between sod crops. So that soil compaction just builds and builds and builds. So we get things like radishes that are going to go down and have a high capability to break through a high PSI soil. So they can reach down and break that up, bring those nutrients from the hard pan back up to the crop, create channels for water infiltration, a lot of things.
So are you planting in between the ribbons? Is that the idea?
Yeah, directly behind ribbons. We try to get the cover crop out.
So while it's growing in, you got something else in there.
Correct.
And then at some certain time you yank that out and
Correct.
Has that ever been thought of before? Ever?
I think it might be the first time ever. Inside, I think in Florida sod.
It took me a second to understand what. Cool. I'm like, it's really interesting.
It's a common thing. It's nothing new, and that's actually ag from way back, before we got greedy and intensive and.
But we blame corn for that and soybeans, but you know what I'm saying, right?
All agriculture can be run in a number of ways.
Yeah.
But in Florida sod, I have not heard of anybody doing it.
So like I said, it took me a minute to get it, but then once I did, I was like, wow, this is really interesting. You're literally going to be planting other crops in between those ribbons, and while the ribbons are growing back together, those crops are growing in there, keeping a living root in the soil, which again helps the soil to remain healthy. Nothing is, or not as much is escaping. It's reducing compaction, all the things that he's talking about there. But just at the right time, you got to get that crop out of there. Either you mow it out, you spray it out. He talked about bringing goats in to pull it out, and then the sod crop grows back together, and bam, you're out of there. That is really cool.
So 3 different ways to destruct that. Well, 4 maybe. You could. That's a cool season crop. We could just let that go when it heats up.
Yeah, it's gone anyway.
It's going to check out. We start mowing it, knock it down, checks out. You might have some lingering growth in there that might be a problem, but some herbicide cleanup at the end is nothing. It's not an extra step. We're going to keep the fields clean towards the end anyways. So you can just naturally let them check out and mow them. We're going to do some actual just mowing to knock them down. We're also going to do chemical application, and then I want to get some goats out here and just
see what they do.
Close off a 40 by 40 block and put some goats on there. They really help break down that material. Runs through their gut, you get that breakdown process, and then the manure goes right back in. I don't think a goat manure pellets would be invasive in the sod crop. I don't think we could do cows because you'd have a big cow patty that would then be on the pallet, 6 months later. But those are kind of the techniques we're going to.
So the idea is the goats wouldn't eat the St. Augustine, but they would eat the rye that you put in between, or
You'd have to pull them off soon enough. I think they would preferentially eat the cover crop first, but if you left them out there and they graze it to the dirt, they'll graze it to the dirt. I've seen goats eat labels off of gas cans that you couldn't pick off with your fingernail, but the goat just sucks it right off that, because they'll eat. I think they'll eat it all. But yeah, you'd have to just pull them off at the right time. But that gut process and going through, I mean, that's how these grasses were, how they evolved and originated, right, was in conjunction with grazing animals.
Yeah,
that was some of the selective pressure that forced the meristem to the ground as opposed to being the apical meristem. So that's how grasses kind of evolved with the animals over the years on the prairies. So they want that reaction. You get different bacteria when there is a animal in the saliva and the chewing and all that. You get all the beneficial bacteria. So
another question I was thinking about is, well, what if it contaminates the sod? And that's why I would have never thought there would have been this strategy in a sod situation, because you want pure grass, right? If you're selling Floratam St. Augustine grass, which this farm does a lot, you want that to be pure. So it seems counterintuitive. It actually seems against your natural instinct as a grass lover, a turf lover, especially I'm assuming as a turf grower. It must be against your natural instinct to put anything foreign into that soil, even if you know it's an annual crop that's going to die as soon as the temps get over 85 and humid or whatever it is. Even if you know you have a reliable, low input that you can spray it out with, even if you know you can mow it out, whatever, if you bring in goats. I mean, it's cool, but it's also scary, right? And so that's why I could never picture this. And of course, this has been done for years and years and years in other crops, but it took me a minute to get it there when it came to sod production.